My name is Average Joe, and I'm a proud geek with expertise in movies, superheroes, and animation.
My name is Beef Pork Ribs. I'm a fine repository of esoteric knowledge, which I suppose most people would qualify as geeky. Though I dabble in many fandoms, my main areas of expertise are anime, movies, and Belgian comics, with a strong recent insurgency of D&D.
Our mission is to bring nerd and geek culture to the masses
by sticking it all under the microscope.
Welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast. Hello there, and welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast, where we put nerd and geek culture under the microscope.
And the microscope this week is red and green, and every different lens zooms in a little bit more, except for the last one that gives a red light to everything.
Beeper, are you excited for? I can't even say this with a straight face. Are you are you excited to talk about Hallmark Christmas movies?
Excited is a very strong word that I would not particularly use in this context. I'm excited for the podcast episode, obviously, but talking about Hallmark movies, not so much.
All right, well that really sets us up well. Ben, the movie buff, you're back, and hopefully you're more excited.
I am, I know you can't see me right now, but just imagine the biggest smile on my face, something that almost looks a little unnatural, but I'm doing okay. That's what I'm feeling like right now. So no, this will be fun. I love Christmas, and even though, like I said in last week's episode, I don't think I've ever seen a Christmas Hallmark movie all the way through. I know a fair amount about them from making or being involved in the filmmaking process. So this will be cool.
And to join us on this journey back through Hallmark Christmas movies, we are bringing back a special guest, somebody who has not been on the show in over 2 years now, I believe. She was last on the show talking about Mary Poppins Returns. So we welcome back Mama Poppins.
Hello, hello. Thank you for having me.
So Mama Poppins, it's been a while, and I'm sure our listeners are wondering, what kind of nerdy or geeky things have you been up to?
To be completely honest, and this is not just because we're talking about it today, I have been watching an excessive amount of Hallmark Christmas movies.
Okay, just for clarity's sake, what do you define as excessive?
Oh, right. Yes. For me, I don't normally watch lots of TV. So excessive would mean most days I am watching at least a portion of a Hallmark Christmas movie.
Wow. So there isn't more than a day that goes by where it doesn't come on at some point?
It might be every other day, but I normally don't watch TV that often. Maybe 2 evenings a week. But in this season, most nights I'm looking for an opportunity to watch a Christmas movie.
All right. Well, that's exciting because you certainly have a lot of experience with this topic. But before we get into talking about the Hallmark Christmas movies, there's been a lot of news that happened this week in the world of nerd and geek culture, and we don't have enough time to talk about all of it. But I do want to talk about one particular thing, and that's the cavalcade of casting announcements that came out for the upcoming Spider-Man 3. I don't know if you guys know this, but 8 different people were confirmed to be in the new Spider-Man movie this week. It's scheduled to come out next December in 2021, and it's filming right now. So we had previously mentioned on the show that Jamie Foxx was going to be reprising his role as Electro. And if you guys don't remember, he was in the Amazing Spider-Man 2, which was the second Spider-Man movie with Andrew Garfield. To maybe refresh your memories, he was blue for a huge chunk of the movie. Does anyone remember the Jamie Foxx version of Electro?
I remember it, though I've tried hard not to.
Yeah, I agree with Beeper on that account.
You guys, I don't understand. It was such a. It was the Riddler from Batman Forever, basically, but it wasn't a terrible performance.
I think it's not that so much that it wasn't a terrible performance, maybe a variation on something, but it wasn't a terrible performance, or it wasn't a particularly good performance, and it also yes, he made strong character choices or whatever you want to call it, but it didn't really fit the rest of the movie even. And there was not only did he ill fit the thematic mood of the movie, he himself had some like internal inconsistencies, which whether that's Jamie Foxx, whether that's scriptwriters, I'm not sure, but it was not exactly stellar by any, stretch of the imagination. And I mean, there's, it goes back to the old adage, a superhero movie is only as good as its villain. Um, and I think that it did taint both him and the Green Goblin, or was it Hobgoblin? I think it was. Anyhow, it didn't really work very strongly in favor of that movie.
Mama Poppins, I'm sure you probably haven't even seen that particular Spider-Man movie.
You are correct. I have not.
But you know who Jamie Foxx is, right?
Yes, of course. Of course I do.
Okay, so Ben, the movie buff, like maybe you can make some middle ground. I'm told he's not playing the exact same version of Electro. Does because I know Jamie Foxx is a good actor, so does that excite you that he's coming back and playing a version of the role?
I guess that's a fair point. I guess I think what happens is when I hear news like that he's coming back, it makes me a little worried because the last time I saw him in a Spider-Man movie, I very much agree with Big Pork Ribs that yeah, I just wasn't the biggest fan of how they decided to work that character in the performance and all that. But I guess I'm always usually open to people giving certain things a second try, right? Um, yeah, I think now is kind of a time where a lot of people are probably like, "Oh, I'm not sure if I'd like to see that." But you know what? Um, the Marvel Cinematic Universe has been doing a pretty good job of having a good track record. So I'd love to believe that if they can bring Electro back in a way that's better than what he did before, and also kind of like a different Electro, because I feel like this is technically a different world than the one established in Amazing Spider-Man 1 and 2, that I think maybe there's a possibility that something good can come of it. So we'll know when it comes out.
It was also announced prior to this week that Doctor Strange was going to be playing the mentor role in this Spider-Man 3. So we knew that there's this a version of Electro was going to be there, and that Doctor Strange was going to be there. I'm not the hugest Doctor Strange fan, but does hearing that he is going to be in Spider-Man 3, does that excite anybody?
I mean, look, I like Doctor Strange, and I think Benedict Cumberbatch is an interesting, or is a good choice for it. Actually, he looks quite remarkably like Doctor Strange from the comics, and he does a good job with the role. But I don't know. I just don't associate Doctor Strange and Spider Man as being people like, especially when you think about kind of the grand scale and the cosmology of the Marvel universe. Is that Spider Man is mostly renowned for having much more small time villains and only getting involved in kind of larger scale things when he has to, or when somebody close to him or that he knows personally is brought in. Whereas Doctor Strange is always taking care of like cosmic creatures and dangers that most other people are completely unequipped to deal with, and then again will only join the other Avengers when there's kind of a crossover between those things. And local New York and cosmic horrors don't seem to have a lot of overlapping statements. When the world is in danger, okay, both of them might join in, but the two of them together is a weird pairing.
Okay, well, when Doctor Strange was announced for being in this movie, there was the thought that if they're going to have this Electro actor come back, and Doctor Strange is going to be there, maybe we're talking about like a Spider-Verse kind of movie. And all the announcements this week that came out are seemingly proving that, because on Tuesday it was announced that Alfred Molina, who played Dr. Octopus in Spider-Man 2 back in 2004, is going to be appearing in this movie as Dr. Octopus once again.
Always exciting to hear Alfred Molina is going to be Doc Ock again. I mean, he was great. And again, villains making a movie really good. That Spider-Man movie is counted among one of the better ones, and it is in no small part due to Alfred Molina's being a great Doc Ock and working out really well. But I understand the idea of like multiverse being a thing that Doctor Strange is involved in, but he doesn't need to be, and it seems strange to have him kind of mentoring Peter Parker through these things, because again, and this I guess is kind of what made Into the Spider-Verse kind of a great movie, is that there wasn't kind of interference from the greater cosmic universe of Marvel. It was a bunch of Spider-Mans trying to figure things out, and specifically, centered around Miles Morales, a very personal story to him, figuring himself out as Spider-Man. So it feels like it's a little bit weird to throw in Doctor Strange into that mix, but Alfred Molina, always a fan. But and also, I really hope that, as always, well, maybe you're going to announce this, and I just don't know about it, that we have a Return of the Vulture, because that was he was the best part of the first Spider-Man movie.
The third Spider-Man movie, or the first. Mama Poppins, have you seen this Spider-Man 2 that we're talking about? The one that had Doc Ock in it?
No, I haven't. To be what I learn about Spider-Man all comes from my 8-year-old son, actually. So, I mean, I know who some of these people are. I know who Doctor Strange is. I watched his movie, whatever it was called.
It was
And
just
I
Doctor Strange.
just Doctor Strange. I enjoyed it, and I could see why he could be cast as a mentor like person to Spider-Man, because maybe it's maternal instincts, but because Spider-Man is young and he's still learning the ropes, and I think Doctor Strange has done a lot of, he does all that interior work of, discovering himself and trying to honing his skills. So I like that. But yes, I've not seen the movie with Doc Ock, so I'm a little bit lost in that regard.
So him being like that actor coming back for this movie really means nothing to you.
It means nothing to me.
Fair enough. Ben, the movie buff, how about you?
Yeah, no, it's an interesting notion, as you were saying, that we have, you know, Tom Holland, the current Spider-Man, who's from the MCU, and then we have a villain coming back from the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man movies, and now we have another villain coming back. And I did hear that piece of news earlier this week that Alfred Molina was coming back. I was also a big fan of his performance in Spider-Man 2, so yeah, it definitely makes me wonder a bit more what they have up their sleeve. And I think the the animated Spider-Verse worked so well for so many reasons that it makes me wonder, what is it, can it be as effective in a live action Spider-Man movie? I would hope so, but I guess we'll see next year sometime.
And then on Wednesday this week, it was announced that Kirsten Dunst, Emma Stone, and Andrew Garfield were all going to be reprising their roles from previous Spider-Man movies in Spider-Man 3. So Kirsten Dunst, who played Mary Jane in the original trilogy, is back. Emma Stone, who played Gwen Stacy in the Amazing Spider-Man movies, is back. And Andrew Garfield, who played Spider-Man in the Amazing Spider-Man movies, is also back for this new Spider-Man.
So I guess they're just going to call it Spider-Man: The Reunion. All our past or most of our past cast members. That's crazy. Wow.
How is that gonna work? I mean, for even I haven't seen all these Spider-Man movies, but I know that they're from different eras of the Spider-Man movies. So how will they tie that in? Do you have any guesses?
It is a good point, because both in Spider-Man 2, Dr. Octopus dies, and in the Amazing Spider-Man 2, Gwen Stacy dies. So it's odd that these actors are reprising their roles. I think what they're going to do is try and pull a multiverse, kind of like Into the Spider-Verse, really just say like, oh, these are versions of the characters. They might look like the ones you've seen before, but they're from different universes. So this is an Alfred Molina Dr. Octopus who, is from a different dimension where he didn't die, and he's actually still Doc Ock. And this Gwen Stacy is actually from a universe where Gwen Stacy didn't die.
I mean, I also like the idea that it could just be a retaking of them, just from a different timeline in the same, like a different time in the same universe. Like, it could just be, and that might be interesting, that to see if they were taken, not just like he never died, but he was taken away from that universe just before his death, or like it does also allow some of like a kind of I'm trying to think of shows that have done this, but like Gantz, or like it takes people right after they die and brings them in. It's not exactly the same thing. Or like those weird little people in the replicants in Doctor who like replace somebody with a replicant just before they die so that they can execute them in a more painful way. But instead of still killing them, it's like they've been saved and brought into this universe before they died in their timeline, but like split second before. That could be interesting too.
I personally hope that they will make the Gwen Stacy Spider Woman, just the way that the Gwen Stacy that was in Into the Spider-Verse was Spider Woman. I think Emma Stone would, of course, appreciate the opportunity to play a superhero instead of just the love interest. It would also be very interesting for her and Andrew Garfield, who, of course, they were famous for having really strong chemistry when they were playing romantic leads against each other, because at the time they were a real life couple, and you really felt like that's one of the things people like about those amazing Spider-Man movies is the relationship between those two. So it would be very powerful acting opportunity for Andrew Garfield to like come across somebody who looks like the Gwen that he lost, but is actually like thriving and being her own person. And how do we feel about Andrew Garfield coming back? Like getting an actual different Peter Parker back? Is that too much? Is it too confusing?
I think, yeah, I think the way I feel about some of these decisions is that, as concerned as I'm feeling currently, I kind of have hope that the MCU, that the filmmakers behind this new Spider-Man 3 will find a way to make it work. Time and time again, we've heard ideas about like, oh, this person being cast as this and this person being hired to do that, and we get so concerned before the actual movie comes out. And I think we need to remember that we can't really make any judgments until we see the movie. So I guess I'm going to, in a cheesy way, say, in the MCU, we trust.
I I think it depends where you're going with it, because like, and I know I've talked to Mjornil about this kind of idea, and she was really excited about, and I think we may have talked about it on the podcast. She was really excited about like the idea that Tobey Maguire might come back and be Peter B. Parker. You get the kind of like older, washed up Peter Parker, which I think would work, but it seems a little strange to have Garfield coming back, because I don't know, he was still technically in the like high school stage of being Spider-Man, and like he was a really fun, quippy Spider-Man, but I don't see him particularly fitting well as a Peter Parker and having like a different enough story. Because one of the things that did make Spider-Verse great was that like all the Spider-Man from the different universes had a slightly different uh story and a slightly different outlook on life. Like, honestly, I'd be a lot more excited about Nicolas Cage being Spider Noir in the movie than the idea of uh, returning Spider-Man from the Amazing Spider-Man, because there wasn't enough differentiation, I feel. Whereas like Tobey Maguire, there's enough difference between him and Tom Holland that it's definitely going to be it would definitely be a different Peter Parker, a different Spider-Man, a different universe, but it just feels like it's a little too close for the other one.
Apparently, Tobey Maguire, they're still having talks with him, like negotiating his contract. And someone on YouTube said that they released all these other announcements to try and like incentivize him to sign, because at this point, Kirsten Dunst is back as Mary Jane. We got the Doc Ock from those movies, so you can imagine how much heat Tobey Maguire would take from the audience and the fans if he was like the one person who, wasn't going to come back for the reunion. So he has not been confirmed yet. But you know who was confirmed on Thursday? They announced that Charlie Cox will be reprising his role as Matt Murdock, aka Daredevil, in Spider-Man 3.
Wow, this just keeps on coming. Like after you keep on bringing up these names, I'm like, wow, that's impressive. That's really cool. Then it's like, but wait, there's more. Like, man, what a lineup! This is gonna be crazy. Hopefully, in a good way.
Apparently, he'll have a smaller role, like he'll be Peter's lawyer at some point, and we're not even sure if he'll actually show up as Daredevil in the movie. This is mostly exciting for me because I loved the Daredevil show on Netflix, and I was so annoyed when it got canceled because of the relationship between Disney and Netflix over Disney Plus. So apparently, it's been 2 years now since the Daredevil show ended, and so now the rights to use those characters go back to Disney, and I guess they're going right ahead with reintroducing Daredevil in a small way into the MCU with the Spider-Man 3 movie. And for those who don't know, like, there is a strong relationship between Spider-Man and Daredevil in the comics, so it isn't too far out of left field to have him all of a sudden come in to the Spider-Man movies. But Mama Poppins, like, you're the one who's like least engaged in all this. Is hearing that there's another character involved in another Spider-Man movie just make you even less interested to go see it?
Actually, hearing that all these people are coming back and hearing your excitement about it makes me feel like this must be a big movie. So it kind of piques my curiosity, actually.
I feel like we might also have this kind of like effect that happened, when who was it? When Infinity Wars came out, and then there were a bunch of people who were like rewatching the entire MCU beforehand. I do feel like there is going to be kind of that effect where like either people for the first time or fans are going to either rewatch or for the first time watch like all the Spider-Man movies going into this one if they manage to pull it off. And I mean that could be an interesting effort to put into, but I'm not sure if I necessarily would want to go through all those movies just to get that experience. And I think, again, I feel like the inclusion of the amazing Spider-Man movies in it are a little lackluster in my opinion, and you could just do something something better that would introduce new people into the franchise instead of returning people that might not fit it as well.
There is a concern, of course, because Spider-Man movies, especially the later ones, have a bad habit of overstuffing their movies with characters. But I think Ben, the movie buff, is right. Like, this is co-produced with the MCU and Sony, so there's enough. Like, the MCU has figured out how to balance a large ensemble. We're told that the additional Spider people will probably only be in like the final third of the movie. So it'll still mostly be like a Tom Holland Spider-Man movie with Doctor Strange there and Daredevil in like 5 minutes. And then all these other crazy things will happen at the end. The other thing to remember is that this is apparently part of like this Spider-Man movie, I should say, is part 2 of a 3-part multiverse story that they're telling. The WandaVision TV series is going to be like the introduction to this multiverse story, which of course airs on Disney Plus this January. Then Spider-Man 3 comes out in December and it'll be like part 2 of the multiverse story. And then it will conclude part 3 with Doctor Strange 2, which is subtitled In the Multiverse of Madness. And that movie comes out, I think, like next summer. So even though this is a Spider-Man movie and they're bringing in all these old Spider-Man characters, it is kind of part of this larger story that Marvel is telling.
But of course, the eternal question is, are Rick and Morty going to show up?
Please no. I don't want them to show up. But it's exciting. I'm excited. And yeah, I guess we'll just have to wait for more news if Tobey Maguire will actually be back or not.
Hey, infinite universes create a lot of paradoxes, but it also means there is a universe in which Morty is Spider-Man, and Rick is Uncle Ben. Oh, actually, I suddenly actually want to see that now because I think it would be amazing. But also the opposite would be great. I don't know. It's just multiverses are hard to do, so we'll see how it turns out. Even in the comic, they're a little bit of a mess. I'm kind of excited to see what it's going to be like in the movies, but also a little apprehensive about trying to do the concept in a media other than print or animation is a very daunting task.
Fair enough. So Spider-Man 3, it's currently untitled. It obviously can't be Spider-Man 3 because there already was a Spider-Man 3. It comes out next December. I'm sure we'll see more as time goes on. But anyway, today we are talking about Hallmark Christmas movies. We are indeed inching closer to Christmas for this year. And this is a topic that has not been suggested by anybody. It's just something that I thought would be interesting to talk about because year after year now, I have family members and friends and coworkers who just love watching Hallmark Christmas movies. And I've just been fascinated by the fact that it's created its own little subgenre of film that people just can't seem to get enough of. So to give a little history here, we have our Secret Origin segment where we all kind of share how we were first introduced to the topic. And to give some just general Secret Origin stuff for Hallmark, as everyone would know, Hallmark originally was a greeting card company, and it still is. But in the late 1970s, they started looking at alternative options, and there's some kind of boring parts where they were like financing cable channels on television. But it seems that in 2001 is really when what we now consider the Hallmark Channel came to be. And it was around that time they actually, as they were creating their own original content, they created their first holiday themed film in 2000, 2001. And it's been since 2009 that Hallmark has been doing what they call the Countdown to Christmas. And that's basically, of course, where they just play a lot of Christmas movies, and they produce. I have a number here that says Hallmark produces about 114 original TV movies every year, and like 40 of those are Christmas themed. So Hallmark has been in the Christmas business for at least the last 11 years, obviously longer than that. And if you really think about it, Hallmark's origins as a greeting card company, of course, there's a lot of opportunities to capitalize on Christmas there as well. So, Mama Poppins, we'll start with you first. How were you first introduced to Hallmark Christmas movies?
That's a good question. I have to think about that. I think it probably would have been just being home at my mom and dad's. Um, they would have access to cable channels that I don't have access to. Things like the W Network, which is the Canadian network that plays the Hallmark movies. Um, yeah, and I know my mom also enjoys these movies, so I have memories of us having these movies on in the background while wrapping presents and getting ready for Christmas. So that's probably where I first encountered them.
That's kind of mine as well, actually, is like I'm going to put this on my parents because I just remember like, yeah, coming home for Christmas one year and all of a sudden like they were just on TV. Like even now I don't pay for cable, so I really don't have access to these kinds of movies. In fact, like I shouldn't say that because they're on all the streaming services now, but to just watch it on TV was something I just all of a sudden, it was like 4 or 5 years ago that all of a sudden, like I kept hearing the term Hallmark Christmas movie. And I kept hearing about how like, oh, it's the end of October. It's time for Hallmark to start showing Christmas films. And my parents just can't get enough of them. Like they'll watch them all day. And so there have been occasions where I've like watched 2 or 3 of these things back to back, just, when you're home for Christmas with the parents.
I love that. I think I said this when we were talking about Mary Poppins Returns. I think I said how much I'd probably get along with your mom. Here's another reason.
All right. I think my experience with Hallmark movies is probably less original than anybody else. I need to preface this with something that I'm realizing more and more. I was aware of this, but now that I'm married, and have to actually plan Christmas holidays with somebody, it's becoming more obvious. I personally, and also my family, never did a lot of like Christmas season things. Um, whether it's I don't know exactly why. I have my sneaking suspicion as to why my parents did that, but Christmas ornaments were only up after December 20th. Like any kind of decoration between December 20th and January 4th only, which were birthdays of my sister and I. And then we never watched that many Christmas movies. In fact, that there are so many Christmas movies that people are like, I can't believe you've never seen it. I'm like, I've never seen It's a Wonderful Life. I hadn't seen Elf until I was forced to watch it by Mjolnir. I had watched Home Alone at school or on TV. So to me, the idea of like the Hallmark movies seems even more ridiculous because I don't have that kind of hype up to Christmas. I love Christmas. It's a great holiday. It's very important, very significant, but the build up to it, I guess I always differentiated very strongly between Advent and Christmas. So like Christmas movies, watching them like maybe maybe a week before Christmas, but definitely maybe much more in the 12 days of Christmas in the actual Christmas season. But watching Christmas movies before that was never something that I did. So all that to loop back around to my actual experience with Hallmark movie, I think I've seen part of one once, but I know what the concept is.
That's wild to me. You've seen part of one once. I mean, I guess it's the opposite of I've barely seen any Spider-Man movies. So that's probably shocking to you. And for me to hear that you've seen part of one Hallmark movie once, it's shocking to me.
Well, it's funny you should mention that because I have a very interesting connection to these Hallmark Christmas movies because, to be honest, when I was growing up, when my parents put on Christmas movies, we were putting on stuff like Home Alone, Christmas Vacation, Elf, White Christmas, a lot of the old TV specials, but we didn't put on Hallmark Christmas movies. So I think the first time I saw a clip for any of them was probably in the last 5 or 6 years. But really, the way that I'm most familiar with Hallmark Christmas movies is because I think it was in May of 2018 or April is when I worked on my very first Christmas movie. Like I've been working on films for a little more than 8 years now, but I'd never worked on Christmas movies until 2 years ago. And the majority of productions that I've worked on since 2018 have been Christmas films. So I remember I was doing security. I was kind of there just making sure that no one was stealing or doing graffiti on the trucks and trailers surrounding this house where we were shooting a Christmas scene. And I was just kind of doing security. Everything was quiet and not much was happening. And then I see these guys go to the front lawn and start laying down these long, long pieces of fake snow. And they put it down and they're kind of getting this set ready for a shot we're going to do when the crew arrives. And yeah, like it looks so fake when they were kind of getting it set up, but once you check it out on camera, it looks pretty awesome. So the way I know a lot about these Hallmark Christmas movies is by the 7 or 8 scripts that I've read in the last few years and all the time that I've spent working on them as part of my job.
And I think you said last week you hadn't actually watched a whole, like you've obviously been on the set of making these movies, but you haven't actually sat down and watched one.
Yes, that's correct. And I'm sure that'll change at some point. But I think I just have more than enough Christmas movies and TV specials that I like watching as it is that, yeah, I've never had much of a craving to actually watch them in full. I've seen bits and pieces here and there, but yeah, I haven't watched any in full yet.
Is your name in the credits somewhere? Like, could I go and watch them and see your name somewhere?
Yeah, in fact, the one that in this movie that I'm about to mention is kind of a Christmas/New Year's movie because it takes place right after Christmas but leading up to New Year's Eve, and there's still lots of Christmas decorations around, but it's called Midnight at Magnolia, and it's a movie that, like, I haven't even watched it yet, but I know a few people that have, and apparently they say at the end of the credits, my name is close to the top, like it's one of the first names that pops up. And I had a friend from high school who, like, I haven't talked to in more than 10 years, and she said, "Hey, Ben, I hope you're doing well. Just wanted to let you know I watched a movie recently called Midnight Magnolia, and I saw your name on the credits." And I was like, "Yeah, that's me." So yeah, I've been reconnecting with a few people who've been watching this movie because they saw my name in the credits.
That's pretty cool. So this is a very interesting situation we have here. We have the fan, the filmmaker, the non-fan, and I'm somewhere in the middle of all this. As I've mentioned, so yeah, in Canada, there is no Hallmark channel here. It's often the W or the Women's Network that airs a lot of the movies. But you think of these Hallmark Christmas movies, and Beef Pork Ribs, you kind of alluded to this. It's like, well, I haven't seen them, but I know what they're about. And that's because generally most Hallmark Christmas movies follow a very similar plot, very similar storyline. And the joke I've seen is like, if you've seen one of them, you've seen all of them. So Beef Pork Ribs, based on your understanding, like, can you describe the typical plot of a Hallmark Christmas movie?
I will, but just before that, while you were describing that, I suddenly realized I'm pretty sure I've seen more parodies of Hallmark Christmas movies than actual Hallmark Christmas movies. That being said, the basic plot.
Tonight on Hallmark Channel, don't miss the premiere of Christmas Town. Christmas favorite Candace Cameron Bure is finding love and family in a place that was meant to be.
There's a photo of my dad in the cafe.
Sounds like a little bit of fate brought you to Grand Falls.
A must-see, all-new original holiday movie.
Wow.
Wow, yourself.
I am right here and I'm not going anywhere.
Christmas Town premieres tonight at 8, 7 Central, only on Hallmark Channel.
Just a small town girl living in a lonely world. She took whatever mode of transportation to the big city, and there people did not know the meaning of Christmas. And then she went back home to her family and discovered it was family. And I just realized the plot of Elf is the same plot as Hallmark movies. It just has Will Ferrell in it as an elf. Other than that, though, I think if you've seen Elf, you've seen all the Hallmark movies. I could be wrong, but that's kind of how it goes.
Oh, Mama Poppins, I'm sure you have a response to that.
It's true. It's true. I hadn't seen it that way, but indeed, Elf is like a Hallmark Christmas movie. There are certain key elements that are missing. Well, no, maybe there, but I'm sure we'll get into it. The key things that are in every Hallmark Christmas movie. But yeah, there's an elf, there's romance and decorations and that kind of thing. So I think you're right.
If I can add something, just because I'm going off all the scripts that I've read, something that I've seen that's pretty common in a lot of the movies that I've worked on is that the lead will normally be a woman, and she will be one that sometimes is single, other times she has a romantic interest at the start of the movie, and that romantic interest at the start of the movie will not be the one she falls in love with at the end of the movie. Typically, it will be someone else that she meets a little later, and at first we're like, I don't know if it's going to work between them. They're pretty different. They don't like each other. But it's like the more they argue, the more you kind of realize, like, yeah, they're into each other, and eventually they will be together by the end of the movie.
In other words, a Hallmark movie is a rom-com set around Christmas.
Yeah, that's fair enough to say.
Mhm.
Yeah. I think part of why these movies are so popular with people is that they are so similar. Like there is I think it was like fast food. It's like you get fast food because it's quick, it's cheap, and you know what you're gonna get. Like if I want a burger and I'm going to McDonald's and I ask for a Big Mac, I know exactly what I'm getting. I'm paying a small price for it, and that's it. With the Hallmark Christmas movie, it doesn't matter what the title is. You know what you're gonna get. You're going for that experience. You're not necessarily looking for like and maybe this is true about a lot of movies that they are very similar, but yeah, it's always, and this is part of why people like these things, is that typically the lead of a Hallmark Christmas movie is a female, is a young woman who's a professional. She might be from a small town, and so when we meet her at the start of the movie, she's living in a big city, trying to advance her career. And through circumstances, she either returns to her own small town or is sent to some small town on an assignment. And she encounters not just romantic interest, but just other people who seem to have that small town charm, who really understand the meaning of Christmas. And the main character goes through an arc where they either learn how to balance career motivated intentions with the pursuit of relationships and love, or that Christmas is not about commercial things, it's about family and togetherness and all that gooey stuff.
Yeah, and the other thing I'd like to add too is that, at least from the scripts that I've read, I think another reason why a lot of people love these Christmas movies is that if you are a big fan of Christmas, in the weeks leading up to Christmas, especially as you were saying, Average Joseph, that this whole countdown to Christmas thing, I think gets a lot of people excited. You're looking for something that gets you into the Christmas spirit. And a lot of these scripts that I read, rarely do I come across a scene that has absolutely nothing to do with Christmas. I would even make the case, and this is specifically for like the 7 or 8 scripts that I've read, that a lot of these Christmas Hallmark movies are A-type Christmas movies, because you would have to change so much to set them in a different place. This is not just like some fun little adventure that happens during Christmas with Christmas in the background. Like one of the movies that I worked on has she's like, okay, you have this girl who's an event planner, right? And of course, she's planning all this stuff around Christmas. She's really busy, so she needs someone to kind of watch her daughter. So this male nanny, comes to watch her daughter, and of course, does all of these Christmas things. There are lots of Christmas events. There's lots of talk about Christmas, and yeah, I think it's the fact that like they are just very they are full of Christmas. And as we've seen before, like a lot of these Christmas movies looks like Christmas puked up on the sets in the homes because they want it to be like Christmas to the max.
There's just two things. One of the ones is something Ben the Movie Buff just made me think of, which is like it's almost like the Christmas Hallmark movies are the equivalent of like the horror Halloween movies. But more to the point, the other thing I was just thinking, and maybe this is like a personal bias of mine, but it is. I think there is something kind of odd about the romanticizing of the small town feel and how like things are simpler and stuff like that. Maybe it's just the province I live in having a really high alcoholism and crime rate in more rural communities. Maybe there's more to it, but it seems a little weird to be like, ah, yes, all small towns are great. Um, and to have like movies that are produced by big companies trying to kind of pull that just seems very strange and almost discordant to me. I don't know. Maybe that's just my weird biases going in, but uh, I don't like that aspect or that concept personally.
I think that's part of the appeal of the movies is that it helps to romanticize the movies. People it helps people step out of their regular busyness of life, and that's what makes the movie attractive. They're like, oh yes, like in this dreamland, in a simple town where everybody knows each other and there's community and we help each other. It adds to the romanticism of the movie, which attracts. I would argue overwhelmingly the audience is likely female, and I think that this is part of what attracts them to it.
I think that's a great point, Mama Poppins, because even like last night, my wife had me rewatch The Holiday with Cameron Diaz and Kate Winslet, and I hadn't seen it in years. And while I enjoyed it, I felt like it has a lot of elements that feel like it's something out of a big budget Hallmark movie, right? Because you have two women who just need a change of scenery, so they exchange homes, right? So one is from a little cottage in England, and she gets to live in the other woman's home, which is a gigantic house in LA. And then the one who's living in LA gets to go to this little cottage in England. And I told my wife, like, I feel like they do a really good job of setting up how fun and exciting it must be to kind of go to these new places. And of course, it's all leading up to Christmas. And I think that's a huge part of these Hallmark movies is the romanticism of the small town of Christmas and all these things. And I even remember something that has always stuck with me where we were kind of talking. We were in a production meeting about one of these Hallmark movies, and someone kind of made a bit of a jab in saying like, "Oh yeah, there's no way that this would happen in reality." But then, of course, the producers said, like, well, this is Hallmark's version of reality, right? And a lot of these things we see may not be common things that happen to everyday people, but it's the kind of thing that I think people watch these movies like to imagine and wonder, like, what if this did happen? And wouldn't it be exciting if something like this happened, however unlikely it may be?
Coincidentally, my husband and I also watched The Holiday last night, even though I had seen it before. We rewatched it, and it's a great movie. But I felt a little bit like, hey, shouldn't we be watching a Hallmark Christmas movie right now? Because we received in the mail a little flyer, Hallmark Channel's Countdown to Christmas, with the list of the new movies that came out this year with little boxes beside them so you can check them off as you watch them. And we've already watched, I think, 12 out of 39. But
That's
last night
impressive.
I was I was like, how we can't rewatch an old movie, we have to watch a new one.
I grew up in a small town, so I do. That's one thing I like about these is they do paint small towns in a positive light. And you're right, beef, pork ribs. Like not every small town's great, but there is something quaint and like life is just slower in a small town. Like when you grow up in a big city, things are just fast paced and like you got to get everywhere quick because there's gonna be a lineup and da 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 da. And so yeah, like and I live in a bigger city now, but it's still I like it because it has a small town feel. So I appreciate that about these. What I don't appreciate about Hallmark movies is they often like shame the main character for wanting to, move to the big city or to move away for the sake of advancing their career. It's like, how dare you abandon your family and the community you grew up in for the sake of living your own life? and maybe that's just the guy in me or whatever, and like not appreciate, like maybe I'm feeling called out because I'm visiting my parents in the small town while I'm watching this, and feel like they're trying to like, it feels like a personal jab against me for moving away from the small town. But it really does, and maybe this is unintentional, but I feel like it does shame people a bit for moving away from small towns for the sake of their careers.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, and I think the important thing to remember here is that, and once again, I'm going off of the 7 or 8 Hallmark Christmas movies that I've worked on, is that as enjoyable as a lot of people find these Christmas movies, that they're not necessarily places where you're like looking for the meaning of life or looking for like good morals or values. And that's not to say that these movies have bad values, because I'm sure like some of them, of course, have like, oh, people being kind and people being generous and spreading Christmas cheer and the Christmas spirit. But it does go to show how sometimes it's like the end game has to feel very Christmassy, right? A lot of the movies that I've worked on usually end with the two main characters who at first seem like they're not going to get along, and they do get along, and at the end we see them, kissing under the night sky, or kissing as it snows, or whatnot.
Or
And
mistletoe.
that's right, or under mistletoe. And I guess it's one of those things that, oh, if they were too career focused, if they decided to kind of like leave the small town and leave the love interest just to focus on their career, that like, oh, maybe it doesn't seem Christmassy enough. Although I did work on a movie a few years ago called Truth About Christmas, which actually had our lead female with one guy, living with one guy, and it seemed like they were probably going to get married soon. And by the end of the movie, she actually decides to be more career oriented and decides to not marry her man, and focuses on her career. So I guess it can happen, but it is funny how certain things may happen that aren't very realistic, but like it's all done, I guess, in the name of Christmas.
So these are romance films pretty much 99.99% of the time. And they have drawn criticism for being the kind of romance films they are, because generally it involves people falling in love and deciding to get married within the matter of a week, which is not too different from like Disney movies that a lot of us grew up on. Knit Stitch, who was on the show not too long ago, I was having a conversation with her about this because she really does not like the Hallmark Christmas movies. And she was kind of articulating that there's a problem with these movies because they perpetuate this kind of myth about romance, and they make it seem like, oh, it's romance is so easy because all you have to do is just turn around and the person who you're meant to spend the rest of your life with you'll just bump into them and it'll happen quick. And when you're watching like a Disney movie as a child, it's easy to say, oh, like this could be what romance is like. And then once you get older, you can watch that same movie and kind of be like, okay, I know this is a movie for kids, so the way that they portray romance is not realistic. But there's a genuine concern that adults will watch these movies because they're looking like they're made for adults, and they'll walk away with the same conclusion that romance and relationships don't actually involve any hard work or just challenges. It's all cupcakes and rainbows.
I think that's not necessarily a specific problem of Hallmark movies. I think the entire genre of romantic comedies and romantic movies have a certain aspect of that in them. I mean, obviously not all of them, but I don't think it's really. I think the idea here is, I don't think that's necessarily the problem. Is the portrayal in of itself. What might be a problem is kind of the mythos that's created that this happens around the holidays, which has kind of created this idea of over romanticizing holidays. Not that, I find the holidays to be, yes, a good time to be romantic and to be around somebody that you're already with, but not necessarily a good time to look for love. But at the same time, I actually feel there's less of a problem with these particular movies because everybody knows that holidays are super stressful time, and that it is very unrealistic you'd ever have a romance actually budding around the month of December because you just don't have time for that. Uh, but maybe that's just me and I just get really busy around Christmas.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point, Beeper, is that at the end of the day, I think we do need to remember that these Hallmark Christmas movies, and I mean, really, as you even said earlier, like a lot of movies are like this. It's all about the escapism, right? It's about all about this kind of fantasy. And even though a lot of these movies take place in the real world, there is it's kind of, stretching credibility sometimes, because as we were saying, like, oh, you meet someone and there might be some problems in the first few days, but by day 5 or 6, you'll fall in love with them and everything will be merry and bright. And I think we got to remember that, yeah, like, I'm sure there are some movies that have been made that kind of deal with like the stress of the holidays. Heck, Home Alone kind of deals with that a little bit with the vacation that they're taking. But I think a lot of these movies are trying to sit you down and say, imagine that, there is this conflict, but then you went to a small town, you met a nice man, this happened, that happened, then you fell in love with him all around Christmas. Wouldn't that be the most magical Christmas ever? And I think it's Hallmark's version of reality. It's not very real in our reality, but I think a lot of people buy into that and kind of enjoy imagining if that would be something that happened to them, even if it never will. And I think like even Disney does that a lot too, is that we kind of imagine what it would be like to be in some of these Disney movies and how fun it would be, even though it's never going to happen.
I think that's exactly it. Is the escapism, and also what you're saying, average Joe. When I watch a Hallmark movie, I know what I'm getting. And that's exactly why I put them on and why I like to watch them, is because I know that watching a Hallmark Christmas movie requires zero effort on my part. I don't need to figure out the plot. I don't need to like pay attention to that detail. You could miss half the movie and come back at the end and you could piece together what had happened in between. I love, I especially love putting them on in the background, as I mentioned earlier, wrapping Christmas presents, or, I enjoy knitting Christmas presents. Um, so I love that. I think that that is exactly why it appeals to so many women, is because it it speaks to get very philosophical here, it speaks to the longing of the female heart, which is just to to know that we are lovely and lovable and loved. And so I think most adult women would know that this is not reality. This is not how things are going to happen in real life, but it's a break. I can sit down for 90 minutes and just, it's almost like turning your brain off and just enjoying something.
So yeah, I would agree. Yeah, most people watching these would hopefully have enough emotional intelligence to know this is not how relationships actually work. But Knit Stitch made a point. She's known a lot of young women in her life that have kind of unfortunately taken like the lessons of the Hallmark Christmas movies to heart. And again, you're right, Beef Pork Ribs. This is not a problem exclusively created by the Hallmark Christmas movies, but because they are so popular, it perpetuates this kind of myth about romance and relationships, which, you know, is unhealthy. And, if I'm being honest, like as a single person, it's hard to watch these movies sometimes because like, oh yeah, like isn't good for you person, this movie. You met the love of your life, over a span of 4 days and it just works out hunky dory for you. Like that's admittedly hard to swallow when, if you're a single person who is trying to like find the right person, it just doesn't working out for you.
This year, I have noticed a bit of a shift in some of the Hallmark movies. Could it be in response to some of these objections that people are raising? But I've noticed things like one movie we watched this year was about a married couple struggling in their marriage because of career. So the woman was really invested in her career and it was taking her away from home, and her and her husband had agreed to separate. But the whole movie is about them doing the hard work of patching up their marriage and focusing on what is important to them. And but another thing I noticed is that usually it is exactly what we've been saying. It's so easy, There's there's a whole culture around these Hallmark Christmas movies. One of the kind of one of the things is you can find Hallmark movie bingo cards, which we've done. You print them, you watch the movie, and it has things that you would expect to see in the movie, such as people sipping hot cocoa or ice skating, or an accidental fall where the woman falls and the man comes to rescue her, and that's how they meet. Or a snowball fight or kissing in the snow, as someone mentioned. Um, but this year I noticed also a lot, they're just a little bit more forward than they've been in the past. Like, in the past, on those bingo cards, it says things like a near miss kiss or interrupted first kiss, so you kind of get the idea that they like each other and they're kind of revealing that they like each other, but then they get interrupted. But a few of the movies we watched this year, one line I remember in particular, at the end, the guy says, "Look, I'm not good at this, so I'm just going to say it. I like you a lot." And I thought, wow, that is very forward, Hallmark. They're not usually so real about it. So I was kind of thinking, this is actually a lesson that we can learn from Hallmark movies, is not just leaving things to fate or chance, but to kind of, seize the day and make our intentions known.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think it's totally probable that when you're kind of in charge of writing these scripts, because remember, like, you still need all these different writers to write these scripts, and as formulaic as they may seem, because they follow a very particular formula, I think we all have to remember that it's quite possible, as time goes on, as more of these are made, that sometimes there might be a bit of a call for, let's try and do this thing a little different, right? Let's still have the Christmas decorations, let's still have the talk of Christmas and people coming together, but let's try and change it up a bit. Like I mentioned, the Truth About Christmas that I worked on a few years ago, this movie, um, while our main female had a guy that she was potentially going to get married to, it turned out that by the end she made the decision, like, her truth was that she didn't want to be married to anyone, that she wanted to be independent and focused on her career. And I feel like that definitely gives a different vibe than a girl feeling like, oh, she falls in love with this guy and now they have to get married. So I think it goes to show that once in a while they can do something kind of different. And once in a while there's a Christmas Hallmark movie that might be a cut above the rest. Like even the one that I mentioned earlier about the Midnight Magnolia happens right after Christmas, but right before New Year's. Our two characters are two that have actually grown up together and have known each other for a while. So instead of this whole idea of like, oh, they meet and within a week they fall in love, they actually have known each other for a while, which I feel like adds a little bit of realism, because I know lots of people that have known each other for a while before they started dating and fell in love and eventually got married.
So the Hallmark Christmas movies, they really capitalize on nostalgia because it's all about Christmas and going back to visit your family and or discovering the family traditions of other people. And that's part of what I like about it is, yeah, there's the, again, Beeper, maybe this is obviously different for you because you don't have as, you said your family didn't have as many Christmas traditions, but I do get that feeling of nostalgia when I watch these things. And even the way they cast these things, some of the actors who have been in a lot of these things have been, they're nostalgic in the sense that they're from a different era. Like Candace Cameron Burr, who's in a bunch of these, like she was in Full House. Danica McKellar, who's in a bunch of these, she was like part of the Wonder Years. Lacey Chabert, who's in a bunch of these things. I know her mostly for her voice acting work, but she's like from Mean Girls and other things people would recognize her from. So there's just this overwhelming feeling of nostalgia that is kind of present in a lot of other Christmas movies too, that just really, it suckers me into watching them at least.
I mean, I had no idea who any of those people were personally, and I understand like the type of movie it is does rely kind of heavily on that kind of nostalgia and Christmas holiday feelings, and I think to me that's probably part of why I actively dislike them more than other movies. Would be more that aspect of it than the whole romantic comedy problem, is that it's putting a lot of things on Christmas that A, have not been my experience, and B, I don't think are necessarily helpful or good things to put around Christmas. And I know I might come across a bit as a Grinch in saying that, but I don't really like that idea of Christmas and that idea that there is a certain way that you need to celebrate, certain amount of decorations you should have up. I get very annoyed at any Christmas song that starts being sung before Advent starts, personally. So yeah, it. But all that being said, yeah, there's no nostalgia for me, but I do understand the nostalgia that's there, and I think Mama Poppins was talking about it, and the movie buff a little bit. Like, they are formulaic. They're trying to alter the formula a little bit, and I mean, let's be honest, especially with the advent of higher criticism and critical views coming out before movies have been completed, that makes sense that they're starting to evolve a little bit, but that still, the core of it is something I don't necessarily enjoy. So I don't think I'd, even if they do fix some of those problems, I would necessarily become a Hallmark movie watcher. But I understand those who do, and those for whom it is, Christmas movies is part of their Christmas family tradition. I think that's a great thing. And that's, very good for them to have kind of almost an endless stream of movies to add to that list. Is, it works, and it's a good industry. I just personally, yeah, it would not work for me.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I think I would simultaneously love and hate living in like the world of a Hallmark Christmas movie. Because on one hand, I love Christmas. It would be great if I lived in a world where like everyone decorates their house with lights and every house in every city has tons of decorations everywhere. I would love that. But I also really dislike these people who like think Christmas is the most important part of life, and not even like the spiritual Jesus is born element. Like, they just talk about Christmas as like Christmas is all about these decorations and the presents and the secular parts of Christmas. Like, it'd be one thing if they actually went as far as like, putting the religious element of Christmas in the movies, but they don't. They always kind of like talk about Christmas in the superficial sense. And I get frustrated because I'm like, there is more to life than Christmas. Putting so much pressure on people just because of Christmas is not a healthy way to live. And if I lived in the world of a Hallmark Christmas movie, I'd probably flip out on somebody, even though I love Christmas so much.
Yeah, that's a good point, average Joseph. I think, yeah. So for one, out of all the Christmas scripts that I've read, not once has there ever been like a reference to like the whole Jesus is the reason for the season kind of discussion. Like, it's specifically been about, like family coming together, Christmas decorations, making Christmas cookies and Christmas meals and sipping hot cocoa and hot chocolate and all that, and doing all sorts of winter festival things. So yeah, I think that's a good point that yeah, I think in this pursuit of maximizing Christmas and having everything have to do with Christmas in these Hallmark movies is that, yeah, it almost feels like like it's the be all or end all, right? That, oh, without Christmas, like, what's the point of life? There's no reason to do this or do that. Like, if someone did, I don't know, an average Christmas movie that was more realistic about like what it's like to kind of like live during these times and still want to celebrate Christmas, but having to work in this and that, I don't think people would be all that interested, because it would just probably be a little too boring for people who like can just like clearly relate and be like, yeah, this is my life. Why the heck do I want to watch that? And that's why it comes back to the escapism of wanting to see something that is maybe a bit out of reach for a lot of people that watch these movies. And the other quick thing I wanted to mention too is that, yeah, when it comes to Christmas decorations, if there is anything I have learned about working on these Hallmark Christmas movies, it's that you can never have enough decorations. Most of the time when I'm working on set and the art department, which are just absolutely amazing. Like, really, when you think about the way these Christmas movies look, part of it has to do with the special effects people who have all the snow. Part of it has to do with the cinematographer, but a lot of it has to do with the art department people who put up all the Christmas trees and wreaths and garland and all sorts of other Christmas decorations. And many times they set up these things, and the director always says, can we get more here, can we get more there? Like, they always want more. And rarely, the only times where we don't have Christmas decorations in a Christmas movie is when, oh, someone doesn't have their decorations set up, and it's like, and they're going to get them set up throughout the movie, so every 10 to 15 minutes we see their house looking more different because they're adding more Christmas decorations and getting more into the Christmas spirit. So yeah, I think that is one unmistakable thing that you can't take out of any of these Hallmark Christmas movies, is that they always look like Christmas vomited on the whole old town or in the people's homes that this movie takes place in. It doesn't look like Christmas unless you have snow and you have lots and lots of Christmas decorations.
I love that you said it looks like Christmas vomited. Um, I recently had the privilege and pleasure of watching a Hallmark Christmas movie with Average Joe, and I'm laughing again hearing how animated you got about it, Average Joe, about being offended at certain things, because I was actually surprised by your reaction to the movie, that you were often, offended by something, or this is not right, or why would they do it that way? And, because you're so experienced in watching movies and you have opinions about good plots and character development and all these things. But I think, again, that's exactly what these movies are not supposed to be. It's really just, I think they're just meant to be something really easy to watch. You don't need to think about it. They're they're not meant they're I think they're made to not offend people. That's why we don't have mention of um, um, any religious significance. Sometimes they'll mention that one of the town's Christmas activities happens at the church, or they'll mention church bells. Or a couple years ago, Hallmark started including Hanukkah movies as part of their uh, holiday specials. But even at that, we watched one last year, which I thought was hilarious. And it was about Hanukkah, but not really. It was just that one of the characters was Jewish, and he was dating a woman whose family, or pretending to date a woman whose family is really into Christmas, and she brings him home for Christmas. And while he's there, she finds out he's Jewish, and he's never done any of the things like, picking out a Christmas tree, or uh, baking Christmas cookies, or anything like that. So yeah, I think it's just again, the escapism. It's not meant to, um, there's no real plot or real lesson learned at the end. I do think it highlights what people hope Christmas would be like. I think we all hope that Christmas would be a time when we really take the time to think about what matters most and be with our family and enjoy a meal with them, and do the little simple things in life. But as you mentioned before, Gribs, like, we're often so busy and we just don't have time for that. So again, I think it's just playing into the ideal Christmas season, what that must be like.
And this is obviously a formula that works because it is indeed, I think 74 million people watched the Hallmark Channel last year around Christmas. It was like the top demographic or it's the top most watched demographic for women between like 25 and 54. And in some parts of the country, it's like the most watched thing in households. And even like Netflix, through like multiple franchises that they've started, are now capitalizing on this idea of the Christmas movie, because there's the Christmas Prince, and then there's like one with Vanessa Hudgens that she like gets swapped with another person. I think it's like the princess swap or something. Even Netflix is figuring out how to like make their own version of like the Hallmark Christmas movie.
Yes, and I just would like to add that Hallmark has other seasonal movies. They've started doing Valentine's Day movies. They have autumn movies. But it's interesting that those are not nearly as popular as the Christmas movies. So I think there is something about Christmas itself that captures people's, I um, captures their attention, or captures their what's in their heart, what they would ideally like to see.
Something else, another kind of detail I wanted to bring up about a lot of these Christmas movies. And once again, this goes as far as like a lot of the ones that I've worked on. I know this might be different depending on what kind of stars are in these movies or where they're made. But another common thing about these Christmas movies in regards to how they're being made is that they are usually made for not that much money. However much money you think that they might be made for, they're actually made for considerably less. And I think that also helps too, is that if you make, and like the horror genre does this a lot as well, is that if you have a horror movie that costs, let's say, 3 million to make and 7 million to market, and on its opening weekend it makes $20 million, then you've made your amount 2 times back, right? And I think that's something that happens a lot with these Christmas movies, is that They aren't made for much money, or at least a lot of the ones that I work on, and I don't know exactly how much they make when they're being aired on Hallmark. But I can only imagine that there are still advertisers that are willing to pay a good amount of money to have their commercials being played during these holiday movies. So yeah, it's one of those things where um, the movies don't cost a gigantic amount of money to make. Like they're nothing along the lines of Star Wars movies or Marvel Cinematic Universe movies or whatnot. And I would imagine that that they do pretty well at the very least when they're shown on TV.
So coming around to final thoughts, yeah, these Hallmark Christmas movies. To me, they're like fast food. You know what you're gonna get, and it's quick and cheap, and that's okay. Like, I think it's okay to enjoy these. It sounds like they've been making improvements over the years. Even something that I've observed is that so many of them seem to star Caucasian people and women. The lead female almost always has blonde hair. But even in the last couple of years, I've seen more and more movies that are, let's just say, they're becoming more diverse. So they seem to be taking steps in the right direction. And yeah, I think there's nothing else I can say.
I think these movies, going off of what I know about being involved in the making of them, I'm not terribly interested in them. It's not because I hate them. I mean, I love Christmas, so I could see myself watching some of these movies maybe in the next few years. I just don't have any huge desire. And I think part of that is because I work on a lot of them. I get to see them made. I get to be involved in this really cool, albeit difficult process sometimes. That at the end of the day, I totally understand why they work. I totally understand why they're popular. Do I love them? No, but clearly lots of people do. So to each their own, I guess.
We're just like furthering the fast food analogy here. It's like, yes, once you've worked in fast food, you don't really want to eat it anymore. Once you've worked with Hallmark movies, you don't really want to watch them anymore. But I mean, for myself, yeah, I have no real intention of getting much more into Christmas than I am currently. I think I'm a perfectly good amount into Christmas, especially when Christmas comes. And so I probably will never watch a Hallmark Christmas movie, but I do also understand their appeal and they have a place.
My final thoughts would be, oh yeah, the opposite, I guess. That I love these movies and I will keep watching them. It's kind of like, if the fast food analogy is, sometimes even though you know that McDonald's fries are not good for you, there's nothing like McDonald's fries, you know? Um, I find them, there's almost an excitement for me to see, okay, how are they going to do it this time? Because it's the same story over and over. So what's going to be different this time? Or, which, every year they have some bigger names. This year we watched a movie with Sarah Drew, who plays April Kepner in Grey's Anatomy. We watched a movie that had Aaron Tveit. I think I'm saying his name correctly. He was in the live action Grease. He played Danny Zuko, and he was in Les Miserables, the film version of Les Miserables. So that was exciting to watch a movie with him. So yeah, I think too, just it kind of has become part of our, for me and my husband and our little family, it's kind of become part of our Christmas traditions that every year we get excited about watching these movies, and how many can we get through this year, and yeah, who will be in them this year, how are they going to do it differently, what is Hallmark going to do this year to kind of like, um, mature a bit or evolve a bit. We watched a movie this year, as you mentioned, Average Joe. Often it's Caucasians who are the lead roles. This year we saw one where the female actress was Caucasian and her love interest was Black. So that was new, and I thought, good, they're moving in the right direction. Yeah, my final thoughts, I hope they keep making them for years to come. We just really enjoy it.
Yeah, and kudos to Hallmark. Kind of like how Adam Sandler is like making all these low brow comedies for Netflix. People they found an audience, they found a market of people who like these things, so naturally they're going to keep making it. So good for them. And yeah, if you guys want to check these things out, there's a bunch of them on Amazon Prime. Netflix, as I mentioned, kind of has their own take on a lot of these things as well. So they're everywhere you can find them.
You can also get a monthly subscription. That's what we did. We got a free month trial to Stack TV, and then we've paid for 1 month, and we plan to cancel afterwards. So that gives us 2 months of Christmas movies.
So normally we would go into the Bat Jar and look at our mail, but we don't have any this week.
Sad. We want Christmas joy and mail. If you want to reach the show, you can send us an email at
batjarpodcast@gmail.com.
or you can tweet us at
The Bat Cookie Jar.
You can find the Bat Jar Podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, including YouTube, because we got a channel. Share our posts on Facebook, write reviews, give our shows a rating. This will help all people join us inside the Bat Jar, and we appreciate it dearly. We're like Santa Claus. We need many letters. Segue?
Yeah, it's a good segue. Yeah. Yeah, next week, to kind of wrap up our Christmas season of episodes, we're going to talk about a Netflix movie that came out last year called Klaus, which is an animated film. It's a Christmas movie. It's definitely it might be a B type, and we'll talk about it more next week.
It has nothing to do with the Umbrella Academy, by the way.
Ah, very good. Yes, that's another thing we've talked about this year that has a character named Klaus. So, Mama Poppins, we want to thank you for joining us this week and kind of putting up with the Spider-Man talk before getting to the Hallmark movies.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure. And if I could just say 2 more things. My husband said, make sure you say Hallmark Hottie, which I didn't get a chance to say, which would be the main male actor of every movie. We refer to them as Hallmark Hotties. And also, he would like people to know that his favorite Hallmark Christmas movie is The 9 Lives of Christmas, all about cats. Not really. It's not about cats. It's a veterinarian is the main female actor.
And Ben, the movie buff, of course, we want to thank you for. Maybe I should just stop thanking you for coming back, because you actually are like the most committed recurring guest we have.
Oh, thank you. But hey, don't you stop. Or no, I guess it doesn't matter. But whether you want to thank me or not, it's always a blast to do this. I always have so much fun. And it was cool kind of talking about something that I technically haven't seen but know a lot about because of the scripts I've read and the productions I've worked on. So always a pleasure, guys. Always a pleasure.
I have a great idea. We'll stop thanking him when he stops being entertaining and a great guest.
Oh,
sounds good to me.
So come back to the Bat Jar Podcast next week when we talk about Klaus. It's available on Netflix, so you have time to go watch it before next week. Until then, I'm Average Joe.
I'm Beef Pork Ribs.
I'm Ben the Movie Buff.
And I'm Mama Poppins.
Catch you on the flip side.
Don't forget to write.
Ho, 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 ho.
Bye-bye.